Nobody wants to hear anything from your new album.
Like watching his shows. I think it's quite fun, and
Yeah.
I enjoy watching him.
Yes, I
performing.
enjoy watching him, but his voice is...
After more than 6 decades of roaring across stages, breaking records, and redefining what it means to be a rock star, Mick Jagger has finally done something fans never thought he would. He sat down, looked back, and chose the 10 rock albums that shaped his soul. For most of his life, Jagger avoided such lists. Whenever interviewers pressed him to name favorites, he'd laugh it off. "You can't rank the music that raised you," he'd say. But now, at 82, with a lifetime of memories and melodies behind him, the Rolling Stones frontman decided it was time to speak from the heart. The announcement didn't come through a magazine or a flashy interview. It came quietly, a handwritten note shared by his team online. The ink was slightly smudged, the handwriting as sharp and restless as ever. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "The records that made me believe in rock and roll." What followed wasn't just a list, it was a glimpse into the heart of a man who had seen it all. Each album carried a story: smoky London bars, sweaty studios, broken guitars, and the restless hunger of a young artist who just wanted to make something timeless. From blues legends who lit the spark, to contemporaries who pushed him to evolve, the list revealed more than taste. It revealed gratitude. As fans read through his choices, one thing became clear. Behind the swagger, the fame, and the endless energy, Mick Jagger remains what he has always been: a man forever in love with the power of music. The London night was still awake when Mick Jagger found himself alone in his home studio, the hum of old amplifiers filling the air. Outside, the rain drummed against the windows, soft and steady, the kind of rhythm that used to make him grab a guitar at 3 in the morning. But tonight wasn't about making new music. Tonight was about remembering. He sat at the piano, a cup of black tea cooling beside him, an old vinyl spinning on the turntable. It was Muddy Waters, the best of Muddy Waters. As the rough, aching voice filled the room, Mick smiled. It was this sound, this raw, unpolished fire, that had first made him believe in rock and roll. He was 16 again, barefoot on his bedroom floor, miming along to the blues. On the desk before him lay a notebook, its first page blank. He'd been avoiding it for days. A journalist friend had asked him to list his 10 favorite rock albums for an anniversary feature. Normally, he would have brushed it off with a joke. Too many to count. Mate! But something about turning 82 made him pause. He'd seen too many old friends go. Charlie, Bowie, Jeff Beck, each one leaving behind a piece of the music that built them. The thought stayed with him. If I don't say it now, maybe I never will. He picked up the pen. The ink trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of memory. He wrote the first title. Without him, Mick whispered, none of us would have existed. As the blues faded into silence, he flipped the record and reached for another vinyl. Elvis Presley, 1956. The moment the first guitar twang hit, he could almost see himself as a teenager again, standing with Keith Richards at the Dartford train station, talking about Chuck Berry and dreaming of making noise loud enough to wake the world. Elvis was danger, Mick said softly. He showed us that rock could have hips. He laughed to himself. The memories were vivid. The smoky pubs, the endless rehearsals, the cracked microphones that somehow survived every set. Each song carried a story, and each story carried a name. Next came Chuck Berry Is on Top, the record that taught him swagger. Then Howlin' Wolf, the one that taught him grit. Each addition to the list felt like a reunion with an old friend. As he scribbled, the hours disappeared. The rain stopped. Dawn crept through the window, brushing gold over the faded posters of the Stones that lined the wall. Mick leaned back, the list half finished, and let the quiet fill the space. He thought about the first time he heard the Beatles' Rubber Soul. The harmonies, the storytelling, it had changed everything. That was the moment, he thought, when rock started growing up. The irony wasn't lost on him. Decades of so-called rivalry had never dulled the respect. Behind the headlines, he'd always admired Lennon and McCartney's bravery, their willingness to explore, to fail, to reinvent. By the time the morning sun was high, Mick's list had grown to 8. He looked over the names, feeling something stir deep in his chest. Pride, maybe, but more than that, gratitude. Each album was a milestone in his own life, a reminder of nights on the road, in dingy clubs, in smoky studios, surrounded by chaos and brilliance. He paused before writing the final 2. For a long moment his pen hovered. Then, almost shyly, he wrote, he laughed. "Had to give the boys a mention," he said under his breath. When he finally put the pen down, he realized the list wasn't really about the music. It was about the people, the moments, the sparks that had carried him through a lifetime. He closed the notebook and whispered, "Thanks for the ride." Outside, the sky turned blue. Somewhere in the distance, a lone blackbird sang. A reminder that music, like memory, never truly fades. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of Mick Jagger's London home, catching dust motes that drifted like tiny spotlights on a forgotten stage. The night's rain had passed, leaving the air clean and bright. The notebook lay open on the table beside a half-eaten piece of toast, its pages filled with the names of the albums that had shaped a life spent chasing rhythm. Mick stared at the list again. 10 titles that read like a map of his soul. But this time, he wasn't just thinking about the songs. He was thinking about what they meant. The people, the rooms, the feelings that came rushing back with every title. He picked up the record sleeve of the best of Muddy Waters, its edges worn and softened from years of handling. "This one," he murmured. "This was the beginning." He could still remember hearing, "I Just Want to Make Love to You" for the first time, the way it jolted something primal inside him. That was truth, he said to himself. That was real life. In those early days, rock wasn't about fame or fashion, it was survival. For Mick and Keith, 2 kids from Dartford, blues music was rebellion wrapped in honesty. They weren't copying the sound. They were learning it. The rhythm, the ache, the defiance. "We weren't trying to be Americans," he often said. "We were trying to be honest about who we were." He flipped the page to the second record, Elvis Presley, 1956. The King, the Flash, the freedom. Mick chuckled at the memory of his mother scolding him for trying to swivel his hips like Elvis in the mirror. "You'll throw your back out one day," she'd warned. Maybe she was right, but it never stopped him. Elvis wasn't just an influence. He was proof that attitude could be art. Then came Chuck Berry is on Top. Mick remembered sneaking into pubs to play Berry's riffs on borrowed guitars, always slightly out of tune, but always full of fire. "Chuck taught me that you didn't need to be perfect," he said softly. "You just had to mean it." He ran his finger down the list and paused at the Beatles' Rubber Soul. That one made him sit still. The rivalry between the Stones and the Beatles had been a media circus, but beneath it all, they had inspired each other. "They pushed us to think," Mick whispered, "to write songs that said something." He thought of John and Paul, of nights spent at smoky clubs in London, passing around ideas, laughing about the chaos of fame neither of them could control. The memory made him smile and ache a little. "Funny how we were all just kids pretending to be legends," he said under his breath. Next came Dylan's Highway 61 Revisited, the poet with a sneer. "When I first heard that record," Mick said, "it was like someone lit a match in the dark." Dylan made words dangerous again. He'd always admired the way Dylan could make a song sound like a sermon and a street fight at the same time. Then his eyes landed on Exile on Main Saint, the only Rolling Stones album he included. He hesitated before writing it that night, but now he knew why it belonged there. That record wasn't just an album. It was a memory frozen in sweat and chaos. Recorded in a villa in France while the band was hiding from taxes, it had been a mess. Power outages, bad wiring, long nights filled with wine, laughter, and frustration. But when it was done, it was magic. "That record nearly killed us," he said, smiling. "But it made us immortal." He sat back, letting the weight of it all sink in. These weren't just records. They were ghosts, milestones, teachers. Each one had carried him through another chapter of his life, another version of himself. He closed the notebook and leaned back, listening to the faint echo of a distant guitar solo still humming in his head. "You never really own music," he whispered. "It owns you," the clock ticked. Outside, a car passed by, and somewhere, a young voice was singing along to an old Stones song, the next generation finding its rhythm. Mick smiled. "That's the point," he said quietly. "You keep the fire burning until someone else picks up the match." When Mick Jagger's handwritten list of his 10 favorite rock albums went public, no one expected the storm it would create. The post appeared quietly one evening on his official page. No interviews, no video, no announcement, just a photo of his weathered notebook lying open on a wooden table, a mug of tea beside it, and a short caption, "The records that made me fall in love with rock and roll. M.J." Within minutes, the internet lit up. Fans from every corner of the world began to share the image, dissecting every album title, every scratch of his handwriting. Within hours, the Mick Jagger Top 10 was trending globally. Rock critics rushed to interpret his choices. Some praised his sincerity, calling it a masterclass in musical humility. Others debated what wasn't there. No Led Zeppelin, no Queen, no Bowie. But for most, it wasn't about what was missing. It was about the honesty behind the gesture. In Los Angeles, Keith Richards saw the post and laughed. "About time he did that," he told a reporter later. "Mick's been dodging that question for 60 years. Even fellow musicians weighed in." Paul McCartney reposted the list with a thumbs-up emoji and the words, "Nice choices, mate. About time we all did this." Bob Dylan's team sent out a cryptic tweet, just a harmonica emoji and the words, "He gets it." But for Mick, it wasn't about reactions or headlines. Sitting in his home, he watched the chaos unfold online with a strange calm. He hadn't written the list for the world. He'd written it for himself, for the boy who once ran home from school clutching a record sleeve, for the man who had spent half a century performing under blinding lights and still felt like that same kid. A journalist from Rolling Stone magazine called his team, asking if Mick would expand on his selections. He agreed, but only on one condition: no grand feature, no glamorous photo shoot, just words. The next week, the article went live. Mick Jagger, The Songs That Raised Me. In it, Mick explained why each record mattered, not as a critic, but as a fan. He wrote about hearing Muddy Waters on scratchy vinyl, dancing in his room to Elvis, and learning from Dylan that lyrics could sting and heal in the same breath. But what caught the world's attention wasn't the list. It was his closing line. "Every record on this list reminds me that we don't keep the music. The music keeps us." That sentence echoed across social media. Fans quoted it on T-shirts, album covers, even tattoos. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a reminder of why people fell in love with rock in the first place. One viral video showed a teenage guitarist from Brazil holding up Mick's list, saying, "If this is what inspired him, maybe it can inspire me too." Another clip showed an old blues musician in Mississippi, smiling through missing teeth, saying, "That British boy never forgot where it all came from." For the first time in decades, Mick felt like the noise of fame had quieted, and all that remained was the music. He spent that evening in his study, playing Rubber Soul on vinyl. The crackle before the first chord filled the room, and he smiled. closing his eyes. In that moment, he wasn't the rock icon, the legend, or the celebrity. He was just a man sitting in the glow of his own memories. The songs that built him, the voices that guided him, the rhythm that had never once left his bones. As the final track faded, his phone buzzed with a text from Keith. "You forgot Sticky Fingers." "You old fool," Mick laughed out loud, replying, "That one's still being written." He leaned back, a soft grin spreading across his face. He had made peace with his past, and in doing so, reminded the world that music, the real kind, never ages. Somewhere, in 1,000 bedrooms, young dreamers were listening to those same albums, feeling that same fire, the same spark that had ignited a boy from Dartford all those years. Ego, the night was quiet in Mick Jagger's countryside home, the kind of silence only broken by the soft hum of a record spinning on an old turntable. Outside, the English sky was deep and still, heavy with stars. Inside, Mick sat alone in his music room, surrounded by shelves of vinyl, each one a memory frozen in time. He had spent a lifetime running, from city to city, from one stage to another, from the weight of his own legend. But now, at 82, for the first time in decades, he wasn't running anymore. He was remembering. On the turntable played "Let It Bleed." The bluesy riffs filled the room, still alive, still untamed. Mick smiled faintly, tapping his foot to the rhythm. "Not bad," he murmured. He still couldn't listen to it without feeling the heat of those nights in the studio. Keith tuning endlessly, Charlie's calm precision, the smell of cigarette smoke and spilled beer. The phone on the table buzzed. A message from one of his daughters lit up the screen. "Dad, saw your list again today. Everyone's talking about it. Proud of you." He stared at the message for a while before replying with a simple heart emoji. Fame had once been measured in headlines and record sales, but now it lived in quiet words like that. Love, from those who truly knew him. He leaned back, his eyes drifting over the gold and platinum plaques lining the walls. They glittered faintly in the soft lamplight, but they didn't hold his attention. What mattered now were the memories between the records, the late-night talks, the laughter, the wildness, the friends lost too soon. He thought of Charlie Watts, his steady anchor, his quiet strength. "You'd have liked the list, Charlie," Mick whispered. "You'd have said I was still full of myself." He chuckled, then sighed, the sound almost swallowed by the music. For years, people had asked him about legacy. What did he want to leave behind? The question used to bother him. Legacy felt like a word people used when they were done living. But now it didn't scare him, because he understood something simple. Legacy wasn't a monument. It was an echo. Every riff he'd played, every lyric he'd written, every note he'd screamed into a microphone, it had been part of a bigger song. One that began long before him, with bluesmen in dim bars, and one that would keep playing long after he was gone. He thought about the young fans online who had discovered Muddy Waters or Chuck Berry because of his list. Kids who had never heard a vinyl crackle before but were now saving up to buy one. That, he realized, was legacy, passing the fire forward. He took a sip of his tea and smiled. "That's the magic of it," he said softly. "You play a song once, and somehow it never stops." The record ended, the stylus clicking rhythmically in the final groove. Mick stood up slowly, his joints protesting, and walked to the window. The garden stretched out into the darkness, peaceful and still. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. He thought about the next show, the next rehearsal, the next song. People often asked when he'd stop performing. "Stop?" he'd laugh. "You don't stop breathing, do you?" But deep down, he knew that one day the stage lights would dim for good. And yet, he wasn't afraid, because music had given him everything. A voice, a purpose, a reason to keep moving. It had made him immortal in a way no fame ever could. He turned back to his turntable, picked another record from the shelf. The Best of Muddy Waters, the same one that started it all, and placed it gently on the platter. As the opening notes crackled through the speakers, he closed his eyes and smiled. 82 years behind him, 10 albums that defined him, a lifetime of rhythm still pulsing in his veins. The world outside might slow down, the headlines might fade, but as long as someone, somewhere, drops a needle onto vinyl and feels that spark, Mick Jagger, the boy from Dartford who fell in love with rock and roll, would never truly say goodbye, because the music never ends. And that was enough.